All right, welcome back to the Battery Podcast with your host, Joe Beimel. That's me. Brent Dean. That's him. Um, Sponsored by Beimel Elite Athletics in Los Angeles and coincidentally El Paso, since Brent is coming from El Paso today at our facility there. So,
Yes, sir.
yeah, getting back in Texas, getting back to the facility there, see how everything's going. Should be. I know you're super excited to be there. Um, Check in and see
Yeah,
how the
always
athletes
love
are
being
doing
back in Texas.
for
That's right.
sure. All right, today I kind of want to talk about just our program. We've talked about a lot of things over the past few weeks, and we kind of bring up obviously that we have facilities and training programs and help with recruiting and just kind of go above and beyond for our athletes who are in there and working hard. But just today, I kind of want to just explain what we do for the people out there that don't really know. They think it's just, there's just so many different programs. There's so many facilities. Um, there's batting cages, where you can go and hit and just pay to rent a cage. There's places that do lessons, all kinds of different facilities and programs. But we aren't that. We do something different. It's a fully, I don't know if you want to say fully immersive. I feel like that sounds like VR or something. But it's just more of an experience where we take care of all aspects of the game: the development, the strength, the recovery, the arm care, the hitting. Um, just have so many tools to our athletes' disposal. So just kind of want to go over that a little bit, and Brent being our one of our co-founders and owners handles most of the what do you call it? Just not recruiting, but most of the sales, he kind of gives the pitch when people come in, and he's really good at it. So I want, if I was like a new athlete coming in and I'm just walking in your office for the first time, what do you say to those athletes? What's the first questions you ask, the first things that you tell about our program, and kind of the things that you highlight, like what we do on a day to day basis?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think to really understand how we go about our training and our mentorship and everything that we provide in our program, we kind of have to understand the athlete because we provide more than just strength training or just pitching or velos or bullpens or hitting. Um, Part of that's just from our experience. Obviously, you've played for a long time, 21 years professionally. I played 9 years in the minor leagues, played Division One. There's so much of our experience that we can help with someone that typically doesn't really get fully valued until they've reached a certain level of foundational strength or athletic skill or consistency with their routine. So for any athlete, and I'd preface this, I've never had any formal sales training, or I'm not trying to trick anyone with a pitch. It's really about just seeing if this is a good fit. So it's always been a natural conversation for us because there's so many options now out there, which is great. We love referring people to other places, other gyms that we've worked with, other people we know. If they're not ready for something as serious as what we do, we kind of push them towards people that might be a better timing fit for them or a better fit for the timing of what they're ready to commit to. Um, but for any athlete, what we start with is just questions. Where are you playing? What are you really working on? What are your goals? I think that's such a grounding question to always refer back to is what is your why? What are your goals? And usually they get to lead the conversation exactly where, they really value their time being spent. The easiest one for most guys, especially when we started 8 years ago, was velo. Number one thing a lot of guys came to us for, man, I just got to throw harder. and this was freshmen in high school and also 3-year pro guys trying to make it to the big leagues and big league guys trying to stay there or get back. It's really a dominant factor in the game. And the key piece for that is understanding where they can first get that ability to throw harder or the capacity to train more to throw harder. And then how to sustain it is really the nuance question. Like, where exactly are they spending their time? What is their nutrition like? What type of other concerns might they have with like injuries or volume, intensity? So it can go so many different ways. And I've caught myself having hour or 2 hour long conversations with a new client or even a returning athlete or parent, just really trying to get to know them. Because I think that's the best way to really be honest and be able to be fair with an athlete to the level of commitment that we would expect from them. And knowing that if they're ready to do that, we're going to commit to them back with our level of attention to detail. So, of all the things, it's trying to figure out what their immediate goals are and how their long-term goals align with those objectives in a blueprint that we can help create. One of the values that we have is we've played at that highest level, especially you with the big league time and being able to mentor people that are really looking for that level of experience. So being able to have accountability with our system where it isn't just, like I said, strength training and throwing, it's their warm up routine, it's nutrition, it's their mental routine, it's how they're dealing with the highs and lows of a season or the momentum of getting recruited and the excitement versus setback of a minor injury. So, all of those things definitely come into play. But before I dive down the rabbit hole of all the things that we really value, I think one of the greatest aspects of how we go about getting new athletes is just really genuinely feeling like we can help that athlete regardless of where they are. So asking them what they're trying to work on, what their immediate goals are, what their current situation is, and then showing them how we've helped athletes previously navigate that routine. And then also showing them that they can all but guarantee their goals are going to be reached if they can stick to some consistency and some ability to adjust and adapt as the stimulus is starting to be executed. So if they're actually reaching that level of success, like I said, varsity level, they're trying to throw harder, throw 90 for the first time ever. That's fairly easy, to be honest. Like there's a lot of people that have been able to do that. You can look at our 90-mile-per-hour club board in the Torrance facility. But also, one of the hardest parts is navigating their time to understand if they're going to continue to grow, how they can get there, and also how they can make sure they can limit or mitigate the risk for injury without just being blind to all of the other things that are available online. Like guys are doing different type of workouts or different type of throwing programs, or they're like you can attest for this. Guys doing like velo programs that are really not very highly monitored, and they don't have any check-ins for their health or their mobility. But long story short, who are you? What do you want? And are you ready to commit to that is always the starting point for every athlete.
Yeah, I think
Go down a rabbit hole,
that's
man.
yeah. I mean, I think it's huge because as you know, what those goals are for each athlete depends on what their program is going to look like. You know, we're
Yeah.
if you're a 14-year-old kid and you come in to train with us and you say, "Hey, someday I want to play in the big leagues." We don't brush that off like, "Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, you and everybody else." It's like, "No, let's all right. We're here to help you figure out how you're going to get there." And if somebody the same age comes in and goes, "Hey, I just want to, play on my varsity team one year." Well, those programs are going to look completely different because if you both come in with the same skill level, and you just want to play high school baseball, and that's not to say that your goals can't change as you get older and as you start to progress, but we know what it takes to get to the big leagues, And if you're throwing 75 or 70 at 14 years old, you're probably not on pace to get there. So what we're going to have to do is get you to throw harder. I mean, that's first and foremost, if you're a pitcher. Um, Obviously, on the other hand, if you just want to pitch in high school, we're not going to sell out for velocity because you don't necessarily want to go anywhere else. You just want to have a good time in high school and you want to be good there, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you're going to have to throw some strikes or you're not going to play. You know what I mean? So it does look a lot different depending on those goals. So I think that is why, we ask those questions right away, because we need to find out what you want to do. And then based on that, we'll give you your strength program, we'll give you your mobility, we'll give you your arm care, we'll give you whatever you need to achieve that goal that you're looking to set out to do. Um, and I don't think very many people realize that, because they think like, oh, everybody's just going to go in and do the same thing. And, we're going to do pull downs and we're going to try and throw hard. Um, and there have been a lot of facilities pop up since we started, and some of them are kind of reckless. It's just everybody does a velocity program and everybody does the same thing, and they're doing weighted ball pull downs and they're doing different things, but not looking at the health of the individual, or is this guy ready to even do this? And that's why we have all these different systems in place in our program, where you have to pass certain thresholds, or you can't. I mean, there are some guys that come in, and if they don't have a certain level of strength, we don't even let them throw a baseball. It's like, this doesn't make sense. Like, if you take an arm care exam and you do not meet a certain threshold, well, we're not going to have you throw, because you're just going to get hurt, and maybe you won't, but you're at high risk. And we're not in the business of, having guys high risk for injury. That just makes no sense to me, or it shouldn't make sense to anybody, but not everybody works it like that. And so we'll build up your strength before you can even play catch. And then there's another threshold where, hey, if you don't have a certain arm care score or certain strength, then you're not getting in any kind of velocity program at all. Like, you're not going to do it at our facility, So it is just a huge thing, and a huge wide net of things that you have to accomplish first before you want to meet those goals. And like I said, if you want to get to the big leagues, you have to throw hard. I think I saw something the other day. The average velocity this year in the big leagues is 95.1. I don't know how true that was. Obviously, it was like a social media post. So
Keeps climbing.
not everything on the internet is true. You got to realize that. But I would say it's probably pretty damn close, where even I think my last year it was creeping up close. I think it was in 92 overall. Lefties average is always a little bit lower than righties, just because there's more righties. And I mean, there used to be more righties that threw harder, but I think lefties are kind of catching up on that end. But I mean, if that's the case, where the average fastball in the major leagues is 95.1, I mean, that's the average. So you have so many guys that are capable of hitting triple digits. And, in our last episode, we talked about arm care and just how velocity is being blamed for the amount of arm injuries. And in actuality, it's just velocity is going up, but strength is going down. And the right kind of strength, obviously, not just freaking benching 400 pounds, squatting 500 pounds. We're not talking about that kind of strength. Obviously, rotator cuff strength, just elbow overall strength is functional strength is very, very big in those situations. But if you didn't watch that episode, go back and watch it. And also like and subscribe. There we go. I got it in there.
Oh,
We always
plugs.
forget to say that. Yeah, yeah. See
Great
that? See how
job.
I did that? Um, but yeah, just
We're
just
so good
going
at
back.
this.
Right, right. Just going back to what we were talking about, I think sometimes I a lot of times I think even the athletes that train with us, because we make it so easy for them to just they're being programmed by me, and every once in a while Josh will program, somebody else will program, but a majority of the time I am programming like every athlete that walks through our doors in both facilities. And I don't think a lot of our athletes realize that, for one. But on the other hand, why we started this was because we wanted a pro level training program where it's everything that we've learned through the course of our careers and things that we've, failed at, things that we've learned from, mistakes we've made in our training that maybe didn't work out. We have all of that knowledge. So we take basically all the good things. So these athletes who train with us, they don't have to trial and error. They don't have to do things. And to some extent, there is going to be trial and error because everybody, we've talked about this before. Training is bio individual, but we take all of these things and just kind of go like, here it is. This is how you're going to get better. And one of the things we've seen in the past, we've had guys in high school, right? And they'll go play D1. And then when they're at their D1, they're like, well, now I got to start doing this. I got to start doing what the school says. And because they know, because they're a D1 program, that program I was doing before was just, got me through high school and it got me um, to the point I'm at now. But now I need to do different things. And it's like, we see so many times with those guys, they just stop having success because they're doing literally an inferior program. And that's what it is. I mean, our program, and I am biased, but at the same time, I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on what we're doing and we're not blowing smoke up anybody's ass. Our program is phenomenal. And you cannot get the level of detail, you cannot get the experience literally anywhere else. There isn't one place that provides what we provide. And a lot of people try, but that's why we've seen, I mean, how many times over the years have we seen somebody train with us and they go and do something else because they feel they need more or they need something else, and they never get back to the point of where they were with us. And that's even guys going to college. They'll go to college and they will be completely terrible and they'll stop. They won't be throwing as hard because they're doing like their college's program. And like I said, I don't want to come off as an asshole, but most college programs in comparison to ours are super inferior. And I'll take as much heat. Anybody can argue with that with me all day long if they want. I don't really care because it literally is the truth. And I've seen it. And we've had guys D1, they'll be like, oh, here, I got to do this program in the off season. And I'm just like, what is that? That looks like a program that is just a strength guy trying to cover their ass and not get you hurt and just provide a little bit of stuff. And that's it. And then, we've had other programs where the strength coach is controlling the throwing programs. And, and you think at a D1 level, that doesn't happen. But it was the same when I went into pro ball. I thought, well, hey, I'm going to have the best coaches. I'm going to have the best trainers. I'm going to have the best strength coaches. And some of them are, don't get me wrong. It's not, but some of them, it's like going to high school, right? You have teachers in high school who are awesome. They are freaking phenomenal at their job. They love teaching kids. They do such a great job. But you also have some that are absolutely terrible. They just started teaching because they want the summers off. You know, they don't really teach anything. And they might teach the same thing. Like your dad might have had this teacher and he's teaching the same thing that he taught your dad. Like same shit. Like his folders and stuff are falling apart because he's had them for 40 years. Same thing in pro ball and in baseball. I mean, it really is. There are some guys who are really good and they study and they keep up with new trends. They keep up with science. They keep up with all of these different ideas, modalities, recovery programs. And then there are just some that go, well, I'm just going to take what's that freaking wand with the gel? Like, I'm just going to rub that on your arm for, 15 minutes and then
Ultrasound.
exactly. There
Yeah.
we go. Ultrasound. Um, but I'm just going to rub that on. And I've literally been in organizations where they had the freaking ultrasound tested and the shit didn't even work. It wasn't even functional. And they'd been using it on everybody every day for, 100 and freaking 20 games in minor leagues. So you run
Yeah.
into all kinds of different things. And just because you go somewhere doesn't mean you're getting taken care of the best that you could. Um,
Yeah.
I'll get off my high horse
Well,
and I've never had an issue with confidence, but this it's just something I'm super
yeah.
passionate about because I know how good our program is. And we've learned from so many people over the years. We continue to learn. So it's just, it's something when we have kids that come in, they get better. That's it. Hands down, they get better. And as you start to, as you start to move up the ladder and you go into college, you go into pro, you're not going to do the same things you necessarily did in high school because as a high school athlete, you probably can't handle certain things and maybe mentally or body awareness wise, you're not really sure what you're doing. And that's why we start with those foundational things, foundational strength, foundational mechanics and throwing. And then as you get older and as you get better, we start to kind of tweak those routines and we start giving you more things that you can handle either mentally or physically along the way. But I like you said, go down the rabbit hole. I can talk about this shit all day, every day. Um, but with that being said, what is
Yeah.
for you like over the years? Like I've said, we've had so many guys that, and I think it's just human nature. They want to see what else is out there. They want to be like, hey, well, I got really good and I PR'd and I threw the hardest and I pitched the best that I've ever done. But I'm going to go try this other thing. And then a lot of times, most of the time, they end up coming back at some point. But like over the years that we've seen this, what do you think? Um, what would you say to like an athlete in that situation? And I don't want to say selling point, but what would you say when you talk? Because I know you've talked to these guys where they say, "Oh, I'm just not getting better. I'm not doing this." Um, what would your advice be when they're out and they go to try and find a different place than what they've been doing with us?
Yeah. Well, a lot to unpack there. I think the first thing, just to address your question, it always comes back to what their goals are. And if we've seen this happen a number of times, they've hit a PR, they're throwing as hard as they've ever thrown, or they're hitting as hard as they've ever hit. They're in the best shape they've ever been in. You try to have these conversations with the athlete to understand what they're really trying to accomplish. And for some of them, they're just scratching the surface of like how good they can be, or they're the best they've ever been at a period. But what we tried to reveal to them is that that wasn't the goal to just hit 90 or hit 95 or throw 97 or hit a ball 100. It was to do it regularly throughout the season and sustain it and figure out the routines that have adapted for them that can help them sustain it over a season or a year or multiple years. Because we've seen this happen where they get these flash in the pan results. Guy hits 90. So they assume, oh, I throw 90 now. And they're 86, 84, 82 throughout the rest of the year. And they're like, well, I don't know what happened. It must be the program or it must be something else. Uh, My advice for any athlete that is in that situation where you feel like you've had some results, but you can't sustain it, is try to have some consistency with the mentors that are in your corner that do take some pride in understanding you as an individual so they can fill all the buckets of your development simultaneously and have some objective understanding of what's working and what isn't in a dynamic process. So think of it this way. This has helped to, I guess, have a metaphor for athletes with understanding the areas of their development. They want to throw harder. That's one bucket. They want to get stronger. They want to gain weight. They need help with recruiting. They need help with nutrition. They want help with their arm pain or their mental game. And they're not singular. So you have to develop all of them, but you might have more of an emphasis on one because maybe the one leads to the other. Like if you have more foundational strength, you have the capacity to train harder, to throw more often. And if you don't, you're higher risk. And we kind of went over that a little bit in the arm care breakdown or that understanding of how that decision making process is done. But what we have found is there's some programs, and I mean, there's some phenomenal trainers out there. So I don't want to say that, we know more than everyone. I think we've always been grounded in the fact that we have a great amount of ability to help any level of athlete. And we don't have the ego that's going to get in our way from pivoting when we need to. But usually there's trainers or coaches or private lessons or facilities that they're good at filling one bucket and they kind of do it at the sacrifice of all the others. And this is the common mistake that a lot of parents and athletes get caught into is they're like, oh, well, I'm just really going for recruiting. So yeah, but you still got to develop so you don't lose it as you're recruiting, or you get into somewhere, they see you at 90, you get into the season and you're 84 again. Or I'm all in on um, velocity. They go all in on velocity and then they lose the ability to pitch or the ability to sustain it. And as a position player, you need to be able to throw hard every day. And if you can't do that, maybe you have a workload capacity issue or something that has been ignored. And so, a very common thing we see in the industry is there's coaches that will, I guess, try to deter you or denounce one type of training. Oh, we don't throw plyo balls or we don't do velo. We don't like this or this. And that's a very dangerous perspective because it might be a modality that does help for an athlete. And if you're taking some tools off the table, you need to be able to understand if it's the risk reward at that point viable for the athlete. Like they need to throw harder if they want to go to a D1. They're throwing 86 as a senior. All right, we kind of have to go all in. But if you're kind of on the trajectory of a JC and you're okay with that, and you're going to take the next summer to develop and then be able to have the capacity to train in specific windows, that's where we're very good at kind of developing that plan. So you can understand that first, we care about them enough to give them that process and really procure that for them individually and not just throw them into a specific pattern. Then it has to adapt with them because like I said, it's never just one lane. It's several buckets at once that they have to fill. And that's where I would say we are probably some of the best in the country with deciding at each window of adaptation if it's working, if it's not, where to pivot to, the what's next based off the data of all the information of the I guess, subjective information from an individual's stress levels, their nutritional habits, their educational issues, their family time, their consistency, their doubts. There's so much that goes into that. And this is where, to touch on your point with the college programs, some colleges are just really good at developing athletes, but they do it with a specific pattern that fits for their mold of athletes that they have that helps the majority of them. We've been able to help those guys, even if they are getting a top 1%, ability and they're performing well, because we're focused around the individual. So we can find the holes where maybe they're starting to get some risk or find some areas that they haven't even considered because that's kind of the confirmation bias that comes with having success is they ignore the issues until they become bigger issues.
All right, we had a little technical difficulties there. Not sure what happened, but we'll kind of get back into this. I know you were talking, and you disappeared, and then I disappeared from you. So,
Yeah,
if you want to just
all good.
kind of touch base again on what you were talking about, I know you're bringing up different college programs and things of that nature. So, I'll kind of let you get back to that if you can remember
Yeah.
where you left
Yeah,
off.
it's hard. I don't wanna, you know, go too deep into things that have already been discussed, and I'm not sure where it cut off. So I was rolling for about 10 minutes probably when I got your text that you got cut off there, and I was like, "Oh, well, I think it's an internet issue over here for me in El Paso." um, just to for sake of redundancy, I'll kind of just keep moving on with that, and then we can always field some questions. If you ever have questions on any of this stuff, I'd say that's probably one of the easiest things to do is just reach out to us, BeimelEliteAthletics.com, fill out a question. We respond pretty quickly to a lot of these things because I'd say it's a common issue, not just for parents of athletes that are in high school, but college, junior college, minor league guys, wondering how to really utilize their time to the best ability where they're getting objective information, they're getting non-biased feedback for them individually, where this might have been the point I was discussing. So they could be at a college and it could be a top tier program. And there's phenomenal trainers that are really focusing on filling one bucket of their development scheme, which could be velocity or strength, but it's typically always still patterned to a program's perspective. Or like you had mentioned, it's like a do no harm type mentality. I saw this when I was with Milwaukee. This is back when we had printed out folders. They give it to you. They kind of give you your individual scheme, like, hey, you should gain a little weight, a little strength, get a little faster. Here's your goal body fat percentage when you come back. And I followed it to the T. Probably my first 2 years. Like every day it gave you something like exactly what I'm supposed to do. They gave like the exact same program to a 17-year-old Latin American dude that it was his first year in the program and he had never really lifted weights. And I'm coming in as like a 22-year-old from UCLA and I'd been lifting for 4 or 5 years and I was already 225 pounds. And I'm like, wait, why do we have the same things? That started to kind of open up that perspective that there are patterns that are beneficial. Absolutely, no doubt about it. There's trainers that are very good by giving you their lane of experience where we can help athletes matriculate at a speed that's going to be viable for them is that we have insight in all of these areas and we can make manipulations, interventions, adjustments to their dynamic faster. So if they're in a season, they need more velo, they're not pitching enough. What's worth the risk reward there to go into more of a velo program and are they capable of sustaining it? Um, I touched on this a bunch, but I wasn't sure if it cut off or not. I think a big issue with this decision making process is a human nature issue concern that there's so much information that's available. You should kind of field all of it. You should take all of it in, but really it always comes down to having a good filter to objectively identify if it's the best thing for each individual. Because if you get caught down the rabbit hole going on TikTok or YouTube or any local guru, there's quality information out there, but it might not be the best use of your time that's going to be sustainable, that's going to have some level of accountability to all the other aspects for you. And you start losing your overall development focus. One key point, even for myself, that I can always refer back to was a younger athlete coming into my freshman year at college, was still 17 in the summer. It was obvious I need to gain weight. I need to get bigger. I need to get stronger. So that became like a core philosophy in every decision I made. I was eating a lot. I was working out a lot. Fast forward 3 years later, I'm 220 pounds. I'm pretty big. I'm pretty strong. Olympic lifting had been like a primary focus for me. We're doing power cleans and deadlifts and hanging cleans and jerks. At a certain point, there was some window where I didn't realize it was becoming detrimental, where I was just getting overly interior loaded. I had all of this heavy body mass without really understanding how to focus on my interior structures, my shoulder, my core rotation, and my mobility. And so I thought a more is more philosophy with the coaches I had kind of guided me was going to work. And ultimately, even with high level coaches and high level trainers, which respected them, they gave me the best of their information they could, it didn't add up to a recipe that was going to have me have sustainable success at a pro level. Was good enough, strong enough, looked the part to play D1, minor leagues. I wanted to play in the big leagues for 15 years. How did I miss that boat? And it really was focusing on the right things at the right times. And I think that is a microcosm that can really be allocated to each individual's decision making process. For a parent of a 13-year-old trying to figure out how to get ready for high school, or a 23-year-old second year pro guy that's trying to figure out how to separate himself on a double A roster. That's where we've had that level of experience personally, but also with working with hundreds of athletes that have individual preferences that have to be navigated. So, like I said, I don't want to keep going on and kind of discussing all these things. It might be a little redundant at this point if we've already touched on it. But ultimately, when we bring in a new athlete, we want to know who they are, what their goals are, where they're heading. And then we do have to get some objective checkpoint of where they are. If they're 3 months post Tommy John, if they just got done with their season, if they're the best they've ever been, or they've done nothing, having a data checkpoint for their arm care score, their health, their mobility, their plyometric potential, their overall awareness of their mechanics, and then all the data that comes with that, like things like TrackMan, the biomechanical markers from motion capture, our perspectives, and then that gives us an understanding of where to go from there. We're one of the best programs at starting with that, giving them a good structure, reevaluating it, seeing the trends that are happening, and then individually having those conversations so it isn't just the same blanket decisions for every athlete every day. Um, I feel like this is something you're really good at and you're really passionate about. And like, I feel like you could talk to the decision making process for hours, probably. But what do you feel are some of those core points that we try to pivot on for athletes with velo or strength or recruiting? Like, when does your experience really come into play, or from what you've done over the past 10 years with athletes for each individual?
Yeah, I'll definitely, go into that. Just wanted to touch on a few things as you were talking. One, just we might need to get Starlink as our I'm in the freaking middle of the woods here in Pennsylvania. So maybe somebody from Starlink wants to be our sponsor or something. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there, just saying. Anybody listening to this, you have any connections with Starlink, or if Elon Musk is watching this, you might want to hook us up with a sponsorship. Um,
Yeah, we need a
but also,
full revamp of
you
our
said something
technical
about,
side.
yeah, that would be outstanding. Yeah, for sure. But one thing you did kind of touch on, I wrote it down because I think it'd be a good idea. We'll probably have to do like a post on social media and just kind of put on there like, hey, any questions you want us to answer on the podcast, to fire away, and
Yep.
I'll do like a story or something on Instagram, and then that can, we can just kind of mention the people and what their question was or whatever. But when you were talking about also like putting on getting to like 220, 225, you were just so focused on getting stronger. I kind of went through a similar thing. It was more of like an experimental thing, for me, because I watched guys like, you had like CC Sabathia, who was, I don't know how heavy he was, 250 plus, he might have been 275 plus. Another teammate I had was Jonathan Broxton, who was like 300 pounds. And both those guys lost a lot of weight. And then they started throwing really slow when they were no longer pitching, at those larger weights. So I was, years ago, I had a year where I'm like, well, I'm going to try and get to 250. I was usually 220 ish around there. And then, kind of 2014, 15, I was in like the low 230s. I was like, you know what? I'm going to try and get to 250 and just see if I throw harder. So I put in all of the work, um, basically eating. I just ate like disgusting amounts of food to try and get that heavy. But I was also really focused on I wanted to bench 300, squat 400, deadlift 500. That was a goal. And I got to all of those, but they literally did nothing for me on the performance side. I was big, I was strong, but it wasn't what I needed. Neglected pretty much every single thing else that you need as an athlete. So when it came time for me to start throwing, I was throwing so slow. Like I remember like pulling down, and I could barely break like 80. I was like 84, maybe top, maybe 85. And very quickly said, this is not it. Like I got to get back to what I was doing before, a little more functional strength, working in, better rep ranges, not neglecting my anterior core, not neglecting, how I rotate, my anti-rotation, and just kind of those exercises that complement other ones. If you get, and we basically have a common sense approach in our strength program. If you're doing something that's pulling you forward like this, well, your next exercise that you superset that with has to be getting you this way, no matter what that is. And there's all kinds of different exercises, um, but they have to complement each other. It's not just slapping shit together and hoping that it works. So I had to get back to that. And I saw very quickly I lost a lot of weight, just because I stopped eating gross amounts of food. But then I got back down into my normal weight and my velocity and everything went right back up. And a lot of that too was I mechanically could not accept the force or momentum that I was creating with a heavier body. I just could not stop that momentum. So for me, it didn't work. And the only reason I knew that is because I tried it and I did it. Now it absolutely could have worked. And I could have started throwing 100 because I had more mass and more momentum. But we there was a trendy saying for a long time, like mass equals gas. And sometimes it does. Like if you're 130 pounds, yeah, you probably got to put some mass on. But when you're 230 pounds and you getting to 250, maybe it helps, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're just a better athlete at the weight
Yeah.
that you are. And we talk about this all the time too. Over the course of your lifetime, you have built these movement patterns. You have incorporated these movement patterns that you've been doing. And when you start messing with them and changing them, it's not always a good thing, you know? And, we've talked
Right.
to even Ryan Croton. I've talked about him multiple times on here, but he'll say the same thing. He's seen guys, it might not be conventional mechanics that they use, but they're throwing 100. And then everybody goes, oh, well, he's doing this. He's not, that's not conventional. That's not how we want him. He's going to be at risk for injury. And then they try to change him. And that guy who was throwing 100 goes down to 86 real quick. But to kind of get to your question, as far as like different programming decisions and kind of things that I base a lot of things off of, and not to dumb it down too much, but to make it very simple, it is results. That's what I care about. I do not care about anything else. If I'm programming you, I want to see results. I want to see you do the thing that you want to do the best. And I don't really care how we have to get there. So one of the ways we do it is we're making sure all of the time we are testing and retesting things, but we want to retest and test the thing that helps you get to where you want to be. I mean, obviously we want you to get stronger, so we'll test to make sure you're stronger. We'll do some jump testing, we'll do some velo testing, we'll throw bullpens. But at the end of the day, I don't really care if you are getting better at those things. Now, with that being said, getting better at those things, most likely you're going to get better at the thing you want to be good at. But sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes your strength can be going up in a certain, so if we test you in a VBT lift, right? We basically, for people who don't know, unfamiliar with VBT, it's velocity based training. So we'll use these little, they call them encoders, or what do they call them? Something like that. But they're
Yep,
like little boxes,
that's
right?
right.
There's a string on the inside and it pulls up, it attaches to the barbell, and it measures how fast you're moving the bar, the bar speed in meters per second. We usually look in our retesting. Now, we've kind of done some different things over the years, but it always comes back to we kind of test in the point 0.8 meters per second range, kind of the threshold between speed and power. And there's a lot of people out there who don't necessarily like that kind of training. And we don't really care because we've done it and seen success. So we use it. And even myself personally, when I was trying to squat 400 pounds, that was my weakest link, right? I was not good at squatting, and I think the highest I had ever gone was 365. I'd never squatted over 365. I did a velocity based training, um, you know, workout for my squats where I never squatted over 225 pounds for a month. And I did all of that at like zero point 0.8 meters per second. All of my reps were at zero point 0.8 meters per second. I think I got up to 225, something like that. Never went over 225. The next time, after only doing 365, went a month. The next time I tried a one rep max, I did 405. Never did anything heavier. So that's why I've been a believer in the velocity based training for that reason. And we've just seen a ton of results over the years. But, not to get into that right now.
Well,
When we
you can
do our
also just
retesting,
say that that's also a super valuable part of the retesting process where some programs will
right,
have you do like a one rep max, but the VBT, you can extrapolate what your one rep max is based off the force production. And most athletes, especially high school and college guys, you're not training for a one rep max ever. And it doesn't really give you any value or
right.
very limited value. So having that VBT system gives you a first safer modality for your strength training, and then second some objective goal that's actually going to be translating to your performance. Like if you can do the lower weight for more production, like your rate of force development's higher, your overall power production's higher, then that usually translates to on field numbers. And we're not trying to train a bunch of power lifters, right? It's like we're trying to train athletes. But yeah, continue with your
Yep.
thoughts. Sorry, it was delayed, so I thought you were done talking.
Oh, yeah, and, to kind of reiterate your point, that's why we don't like the one rep max is because it's just very slow. We're not trying to create, and if you're trying to produce power and you're trying to increase strength, there are going to be rep ranges and there's going to be weights that you're gonna move a lot slower. But with that being said, we do not wanna get in the habit of moving slow all the time and getting into like one rep maxes that are very slow, super heavy, high rate of injury on those type of things. I mean, and then on the other end, really high rep because you'll load up, you'll do as many reps as you can, and then those become very slow as well. And then form breaks down, also very high risk for injury. So, different rep ranges are are key for for anything in strength, whatever you're looking for, whatever that goal is. And we're not against higher rep ranges in certain times of the off season if you're trying to gain weight, but also we've seen, because we do all of this testing, retesting, the guys who are doing like hypertrophy stuff tend to not get stronger in the ways that they're looking for. Now it's fine if you put on weight, but then what's the point of putting on weight if it made you slow and you can't perform and do the thing that you're trying to do? So that's where we go back
Yeah.
to why we make programming decisions, because you have to get good at the one thing you're trying to do. And that's why we test all of these things. And before, if you're doing a 4-week strength program or you're doing a throwing program, and I will look at all of the retesting stuff. So if it's the VBT, maybe some jump testing, we'll look at broad jump, somebody's vert. And when we look at these things, we're not necessarily looking for them to PR every single time. It's like anything, right? We'll see a guy do his start with us the first 4 weeks, everything jumps up. Maybe after the second 4 weeks, everything jumps up and he keeps PRing on jumps. Okay. Which is great, but not if he's not throwing harder and that's his goal is to throw harder, or he's not hitting the ball harder. Now, a lot of times those things go hand in hand, and then it's like anything. Right? If you're not going to just continue to jump higher, there's a ceiling where you're going to have to start doing jump training and different things if you want to jump higher. And that's not what we're doing. We're not worried about your vert, and we're not worried about you trying to jump as high as you possibly can. We want to get to kind of a threshold that we're comfortable with, to know that's where you're at, and make sure you're not losing that. So
Yep.
we start losing that,
Yeah.
then that's when we have to worry. And there's sometimes you will sacrifice some of these numbers because, like I said, if you're trying to gain strength, sometimes you got to take a couple steps back to keep going forward, right? Even with velocity,
Right.
sometimes we're like, hey, you're at 140 pounds and you're throwing, say you're 140 pounds, you're throwing 90 miles an hour. That's pretty freaking good. There aren't many 140-pound dudes that can hit 90. But now, when we go back to what's your goal? Oh, you want to play in the big leagues? Well, 140 pounds throwing 90 miles an hour, you're not going to get there. I can tell you that right now. So if we're trying to get there and that's what the goal is, we are now going to focus on you getting bigger and stronger, because we don't want you bigger. We don't want you getting bigger by like getting a freaking gut, And but
Right.
with that being said, one of the cruel facts about baseball players is you don't want to be freaking shredded either. I mean, I see a lot of, the younger kids, they want to have freaking abs, right? Everybody, I want to have abs too. Why not? But if you're a baseball player and your body fat is so low, that's not ideal either. So sometimes you do have to put on a little bit of bad weight. I don't want to call it bad weight, but sometimes you do have to get some body fat. You can't be 2% body fat and think you're going to pitch in the big leagues and stay healthy. And we can get into that later as well. But,
Well, that's a key point you should
you might
definitely
have to
touch
take a
up on a
couple
little bit
steps
more.
back. Go ahead.
Just saying, like,
Delayed.
yeah, I think
Delay.
that's
We'll
such
edit
a
that out.
key point. Yeah, understanding plateaus at a certain point are okay, but also what you said about getting in the big leagues and staying there. One of the factors that a lot of athletes really overlook is the length of season and the ability to repeat consistently. And we see that with a lot of our high school guys when they first get into college or their first JC season. And they're like, man, I was 180 to start the year. I'm 160 now, and I don't know what happened. It's like, yeah, that's part of your growth as an athlete is figuring out how to sustain where you were and what your homeostasis is. And part of the dynamic we've seen with some of the panic from some of the training perspectives is athletes will be 94, 95, and then they get stuck, or even call it 88 to 90, and then they get stuck. We think that having that sustainability for 3, 6, 12 months is just as valuable as them ticking up 1 mile per hour, but then they tank and they're up and down all year. And that's where a lot of athletes make poor decisions. We see it happen with a lot of youth athletes like, oh, well, he hasn't gained weight in a month or he's still the same velo. And we're like, yeah, but he hasn't dipped down or had that arm pain that he initially came in here with. And he's actually throwing strikes. So this is about sustainability. And I think many athletes overlook that, especially if they've never played the length of season that they're going to or the amount of volume or games that they're expected to perform. So even high school to college, you go from 7 innings to 9 innings. You go from like 20 games to about 50 to 100, depending on what level you're at. If you have fall and winter and summer, and then it's just the wear and tear on your body. You're a bigger, stronger athlete. You're doing so much, and that's kind of where we came up with that, you know, conversation where we told parents like, "Hey, he's playing more than Clayton Kershaw, but he's putting none of the time into his recovery, his strength, his nutrition that we would expect from that volume of time that he's playing." So, yeah, not to cut you off there. I mean, I just feel like that was such a key point, definitely to explain, because to make it easy for someone to understand this, listening to this, you have to be able to really identify what your challenges are ahead of you and see in what capacity you have to sustain that. Not just if you have the high end ceiling of, I've hit 90, I've hit 95, I've done XYZ, but you can't see if it's going to stay with you throughout the time. Because the reality is, you don't just stay the same. You either get better or you get worse. And what we're trying to find is some level of consistency to keep that threshold, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you're at the big league level, obviously, it's 162 games, and it is not uncommon to kind of fluctuate. Like velocity fluctuates. There were days I felt fantastic, and my younger years where I'm throwing 95 plus. There were also days I was throwing as hard as I could, and it was 88. And a lot of that for me was just learning how to function over the course of a 162 game season with all of those things you talked about: nutrition, diet, strength program, maybe not throwing too much before a game or throwing too hard and too much intensity. But at the same time, there was never a time I was worried. I was just like, oh, I just don't have it today. I today don't feel great. Maybe I pitched a lot, whatever. As I got older, that gap started to shrink a little bit. Obviously, as I got older, my velocity was going down a little bit in my later years. And that was another thing. Ended up going way up, in my 40s. But, velocity's creeping down a little bit. But then my gap was like here, where I was around the same every single game. So I knew what I was working with more consistently than I did when I was younger, because I would come in throwing, like I said, one game 95, blowing it by guys, next game throwing just as hard, and didn't really, even at the big league level as a rookie and 1 year, 2 year player, didn't realize the differences and didn't have the same body awareness that I had once I was older. So mechanically, maybe not doing the same things along with all of the other physical stuff. And it was just a high range. So that's where you talk about guys being consistent, and how you stay in the big leagues is being consistent. But if you don't know how to keep that consistency, especially in your performance with metrics like that, then it's going to be tough for you. And that's the same at every level. But now I feel we see more guys are in tune with their numbers and their data. And sometimes that's not a beneficial thing, because they'll look and go, oh man, my velocity was way down today. And if I talk to a high school kid or a college kid, and maybe they're a 91 mile an hour guy max, that's what they're topping out at. But they're like, man, I was 88 today. And I'm just like, what? Your velocity wasn't really down, you were topping out at 88, and you only peak at like 91. So 88 isn't that big of a
Yeah.
deal. You know what I mean? And you still have to learn in those situations how you deal with that. And you still got to get people out, on the pitching side. You can't let a couple mile an hour difference
Yep.
on your fastball determine either what your success is going to be. So it's just, and this is why I'm talking about this, is because this is kind of the benefit of our program, is because you have guys like myself, and you've got guys like Josh, and you have guys like Drew Marufo there in Texas on the pitching side. And, we've got Dante and Gabe and even Jonathan, and so many guys over the years as well, who've had that success and have been in those situations on the pitching side. And some of them are still learning. Some of our trainers are still playing, and they're still learning this stuff. So,
All of them are still
but you
learning.
have
They should
access
all
to all of
continue
these
to
people.
learn.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And what I mean by that is they're learning on their end how they're going to attack these kind of scenarios that come up if they're still
Absolutely.
playing, with consistency. But you have access to people who have been there, done it at a high level, people who are doing it now at a high level. And it's just this really cool thing, where if I was that age, if I was high school, if I was college, even if I was in pro ball, if I was in the big leagues, it would be somewhere that I wanted to go so I could learn from these people. And sometimes, even for myself, I would tell when Sean Isaac worked for us, he was in pro ball, and one of the good things about what we do is, I say this all the time. There is no ego in what we're doing. I don't care if I learn from somebody who is a 20-year big leaguer or if I learn from somebody who played junior college. You can always learn from people. That doesn't necessarily have to be, oh, I only listened to like 20-year big leaguers. Now, with that being said, the 20-year big leaguer is going to have a different perspective on things, that somebody who played junior college has absolutely zero idea about. So we do have to remember that. But you can learn from anybody at any time. I mean, I'm learning from my 11-year-old son now how to have a YouTube channel because he's getting a crazy amount of subscribers in the course of like 2 days. And I'm just like, how do you do that? What is going on? How come I do not know how to do this? So you can always learn from somebody. But, to kind of go back to your point, and you have to realize through the course of a season, it is going to be like this. You're not just always going to be up here. We want you up here all the time, but sometimes you're going to be down here, and you still have to be able to perform. And you cannot use that as an excuse, because every single person, and I've said this before, you could get a junior college pitcher, and if he's at his peak on that day, he can probably get some guys out in the big leagues. If he's feeling great, he's got his good stuff, he's putting the ball where he wants. Hitting is hard. So you can get some guys out. But the difference is when you're down here, you still have to get the best hitters out in the world. And that's where guys struggle, because they can do it here, but they can't do it here. They can't do it here. They definitely can't do it down here. And that's where we talk about consistency. And that consistency comes with just doing it, but it also comes with your training routines, your diet, all the stuff we've already talked about. But yeah, when we kind of going back to like programming decisions, is there, when you were playing, obviously we didn't have this when we played. We didn't have a training facility like ours, and that's why we wanted to start it. But was there anything that you found in season, off season things that worked the best for you, in season things that worked the best for you? Did you have kind of a routine with those, or were you just like constantly trying to like experiment and figure it out?
First, I think it's important to note that I don't feel like I'm the gold standard of success or understanding strength adaptations. I think I learned a lot, and a lot of it was trial and error. And I think a lot of the value I bring to the guys that we work with is understanding some of the mistakes I made and having it resonate with them when they start seeing themselves go down the similar path. One of the first things that started to help me separate physically was strength training in season. I think that's still a very common misconception of how people are supposed to do their workouts. And we get this a lot with parents because they've been caught in this lesson mentality where they're disconnected from accountability and a long-term progression. It's just short windows of adaptation. They got a little better at this and then they remove themselves. They get a little better at this and remove themselves, not understanding that those are diminishing aspects that if you don't continue to sharpen those tools, they'll be terrible. They'll start to go away. Um, but my point is,
Yeah,
I think
quickly.
strength training in season evolved for me where it wasn't just hypertrophy like I was thinking in UCLA, get big, get strong at all costs. Like that's going to be the driver for every decision I'm making is that. It was listening to my body, getting better at listening to my body with what hurt, understanding that's okay to have aches and pains, that you can play at 80% and most people do, but how to make sure you're limiting the risk for further injury or lack of performance, and then starting to get more specific in how to be prepared to perform that night without sacrificing my potential a week, 2 weeks, a month from now, because I'm always taking the safe road of doing nothing or very minimal. My off-season routine started to really evolve when we started doing stuff together. This is probably like I mean, 2013, 2014, started really incorporating a little bit more of an arm care focused program. It wasn't just going to the NARP gyms and lifting at 24-hour fitness as much as I could, trying to walk around with a cutoff tee. I think the big
Hold up,
aspect
hold up, hold
was
up,
something you mentioned. Yeah.
real quick. For everyone out there who does not know, what is a NARP gym?
Okay. I don't know where this came from, but
It's
I've
one of my
adopted
favorite
this and
things.
I've probably been saying it for 10 or 20 years. NARP gym, I mean, no disrespect to other people, but it's non-athletic regular person. It's basically,
That's right.
your
That's
weekend
right.
warrior, the guy is just doing bicep curls and bench press. And it's very easy to get caught into that. First, because it's usually the lowest hanging fruit for a lot of athletes. When they're 15 to 17, they see guys that are just bigger and stronger. It's easy to find a gym for 25 bucks a month and go there and start to see some progress. And don't get me wrong, that is valuable, but usually it doesn't work at the speed they need. And it usually starts taking them down the road of not filling the buckets they actually need to be focusing on, which is kind of my point, right? Was I need to be able to throw harder, hit better, stay healthier throughout the season, not pull a quad or hamstring. And as I got older, I got better at understanding how to do those things because trial and error first, and then having better information, having better people in my corner. And that's where we take a lot of pride in being able to help people with that structure initially, and then identifying how things are evolving and having some multiple tools or different ways to address the deficits they're starting to have or the risks they're starting to put themselves into. Um, and like you had mentioned with being 250 pounds and being really big and strong, I remember those days. I mean, you look like a WWE wrestler with the "Where's the Beef" shirt, had the Fu Manchu. I mean, you were gigantic. Um, it was similar for me where I thought that's kind of what you're trying to accomplish. But then when I would go and they're still like, well, your arm needs to improve. And I was like, well, I thought I had a pretty good arm. And I'd gone through cycles. And if you ask anyone that was with me throughout my journny, they might have told you, oh, you had a bad arm or you might have had a great arm. And it really did revolve around kind of the things I was doing in those windows to focus on the performance metrics or the performance um, on the field that really mattered. And so having routines in first identifying what was valuable to you. Now we really revolve that around things like arm care and overall strength, your weight, your grip, your pain, kind of how you're evaluating that. And then being able to make faster decisions so that you can perform at a level where your plateau is still viable for that level. Um, I think that's super helpful for any athlete that's trying to decide how to train is obviously always keep pushing for those goals. That's never going to change. You're always going to want to throw a little bit harder, get a little bigger, get a little stronger, run a little faster, but understanding kind of where your low ends get to and what leads to that so you can make some adjustments a little more quickly and not think you have to scrap everything and start over every off season or every time you have a lack of PRs for a month or a couple months in a row. So yeah, a lot of it really goes into how we train our athletes. And that's kind of a core value is just like you said, results.
Yeah, I just wanted to even touch on hypertrophy because I've done like some really long, like high rep hypertrophy phases, and I got big. I mean, I was just big and look great. Muscles look big, and every time I hear the word hypertrophy, I think of bodybuilders. And, there was a video years ago. I can't remember the bodybuilder, that Green, his last name's Green. He's got like the dreads, but they're like starting like right here, you know. He
Yeah.
was like
Had the big
Khalil
ponytail.
Green, I think. Is that his name?
Khalil. Yeah, that
Yeah,
sounds
I
right.
think it's like
Yeah.
Khalil Green. Yeah, but I mean, he's a monster, right? He's huge and big bodybuilder, and he's like punching a bag. He's like boxing, he's punching a bag, and it's almost comical because you see it, and he is moving so slow. He thinks he's like crushing this bag and hitting it really hard, and it just looks ridiculous. Like he's not athletic.
Yeah.
And that's what I always, when I think of hypertrophy, that's what I think of. That's like what pops in my head is you're going to be this big, just slow freaking dude. And there's different ways you can go about it. But every time I've done like a hypertrophy phase, I am so big. And then but I realize soon after I am not very strong. So my muscles are large, but they're not able to like really work the way I want them to. You know, I'll be like, oh man, I'm freaking huge. I'm up to like 240 right now. And then I'll go to like, I've been benching 12, 15, 20 reps or whatever. And then I'll throw like 250 on the bar and I can't freaking do it. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Like I've gotten so
Yeah.
weak from getting big, So just because you're getting big and you're doing a workout that is making you big doesn't mean it's making you strong. And that's where,
Yeah.
I like to tell younger guys because we even see it now, and I'll see freaking kids. I'm programming them something, and then they'll post something on Instagram on their story, and they're in their high school gym doing some dumb shit. I'm just like, what are you doing right now? Like, why did you just do 8 reps of deadlift? Like, and then I start explaining it to them. They don't. I'm like their freaking dad at this point. They don't want to listen to me, bitching them out on social media
Yeah.
when they're trying to look cool. But like, I'm like, dude, do you understand 8 reps of like heavy deadlift? Like your form is going to break down after 2 or 3, and you're going to put yourself at injury or risk for injury, especially with deadlifts. Deadlifts are a great exercise, but you also don't want to mess around and break down on form or we tell our trainers this too. This is why we start standing in most of our programs. You start standing and then you work to the ground because you don't want in those standing positions, you don't want to compromise your core. You don't want to compromise certain things. And now you've got a bunch of weight on your back after you did some deadlifts or you did some, something else, uh, maybe some supine bridges or whatever. And now all of a sudden you're trying to do a Bulgarian or you're trying to do something and you've got weight on you and you've compromised your core and now you're fatigued and all of a sudden you tweak something and your back blows out or you blow out a hamstring or so, and this is another thing I don't think, a lot of our athletes realize how these things are structured. They're structured to make you strong, but also keep you healthy, increase mobility, increase range of motion when you need it. So those type of things they're not vocalized. Like, hey, this is why you're starting out. Say you're starting with a split squat. This is why you're doing the split squat first and not the deadlift first. Because if we did the deadlift, now you're fatigued. Now you got weight standing up instead of just picking it up off the ground. So just different things like that is when we write programs. It's just all of this thought and all of this experience that goes into that this is why I like I've said this a million times since we started doing this, is just putting this information out there. And, if you're watching this and you're willing to learn, this isn't stuff that we made up either. It's like all stuff that we've learned. And I feel like that's the smartest people on earth have learned from multiple people. They've learned from, some very smart people, but then also very obscure people. It's easy to pick stuff up. And then just doing it too. You learn from doing things. You learn from training athletes. And that's not to say when we started in 2018 that we're still doing what we were doing in 2018. We've learned, we've adapted. Athletes have changed. I feel like since we started, personalities of, athletes in high school have changed. There's just so many different factors that you have to think of. And we have to be aware of that. Big leaguers have changed. Pro guys have changed. The things that like you look at Kenley Jansen comes into the building as basically a shoe-in Hall of Famer. I mean, he would never say that, but he is without a doubt. He's one of the best closers that have ever lived. And if we trained him, when I first met him back when I was at the Dodgers and he was still catching, that would have looked completely different and he would have needed different things. Now he needs a specific thing when he throws his bullpens or when he does his routine. And he's really good at still taking into consideration that he doesn't know everything and he still wants to learn. And he's always asking, the guys in there to help him with different things. So it's just realizing you've got to learn to adapt as a player. You've got to learn to adapt as a trainer, as a program, and that's where I think we've won. We're just better at everybody than that does it. And that's like I said before. That's not to be cocky or arrogant. It's just we've seen the results. I've seen
Yeah.
when people who leave our program and go to some of these bigger programs, not necessarily bigger, but more. Um, they're on social media and they've got a good following and things like that, and they never get better. They never come back, and it's like there might be one or two here and there. But if you really put the effort in, if you really believe in what you're doing and you work hard, like there is no place better to reach your goals um, than our program.
Yeah. And definitely, it does take a little bit of trust to understand that the results aren't always going to be overnight. For some guys, there are some pretty quick returns on their movements, or they start getting better quickly. The significant value that we provide is that ongoing mentorship and that accountability of sustaining the level of experience or sustaining the level of execution that they're hoping for. And I would say a core reason why most other programs don't do it this way is first, it's just really hard. It's really challenging to care that much about each person and each athlete you have, to give that level of attention to detail. And then it takes a pretty tremendous amount of experience to have a venerable staff, to have the ability to integrate all the data, to understand it, and then to be able to articulate to each person the way they take information, how to execute what's working for them and what isn't, and then manipulate the next 3, 4, 10, 20 weeks of understanding how this should look if they execute it well. And we have their back, and they can fall back on it and kind of regress and have injuries or setbacks or a bunch of different things that could come up. Um, I know we can continue on this for hours, but just for anyone that's still trying to really understand what exactly it is we do, I feel like I get these questions a lot. We mentor athletes at the highest degree possible for what their goals are. And it does always start with some foundational understanding of where they are metrically, um, subjectively, like qualitatively with their athleticism, their mindset. For me, it's really about understanding what we can do to intervene immediately with any type of high risk mechanical issue, strength issue, consistency issue. And then as they continue to put the work in, if they can fit for the level of accountability they say they want, they should have continued results. And then as they get to a plateau, whether it's with their strength or their size or their speed or their throwing velocity, we have the tools to help them figure out how to break ceilings, or at least be able to direct them in the right places where their skill set will be valued, such as like going to a different school when they wanted to go to a specific power D1 and they really value playing time and getting their education. This is where the entirety of their player development has to be considered. So onboarding for any athlete takes about 7 to 10 days. That's understanding all of their numbers, their health, their playing history, their strengths, their performance metrics. Then we decide, and you're a big part of that first decision, as well as a lead trainer, to understand what that first step should look like. And then if they continue, we intervene on that progression in a 3 month, 6 month, 12-month type routine. The longer we have on the athlete, the more we feel like they can have sustainable results. And I think that's where our athletes that have the most success, they really buy into it, that they're in it for the long run and not just trying to get a quick 3 week change. And we've helped guys in those windows too. But the more they've realized that we can help them get ready for high school, get to varsity, play in college, find a pro team, play in pro ball, continue for as long as they want to play, they realize it is a valuable mentorship that can give them a lot of return on the time they've spent on it. So I'm biased too because I mean, it's something I pour a lot of my time and effort and energy into, but I don't feel there are many places or many people in general that really care as much as we do about our individual athletes.
Yeah, no doubt. And I've said this before. I think I made a post about this at one point on Instagram. But you even look at the trainers that are involved with us in both locations. I always say like we'll go to Dante is one of our oldest athletes, not oldest in age like myself, but like been there the longest as an
Yeah,
athlete.
senior trainer. Yeah,
Uh,
experience.
yeah. But when he came in, he was what, a 19-year-old kid who got drafted out of high school by the Indians. He came into the facility and he could not throw a ball straight. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but everything cutter, 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 cutter. And it was like 85, 86, and that was his fastball, and he's trying to throw it harder. And then and I sent these guys these videos from when they first started with us, all of our trainers, and Dante got up to 95, 96, got traded to the Pirates, was in their organization for a while, but um throwing freaking fuel after coming to us, you know, with 86-mile-an-hour cutters. And then you got somebody like Gabe. I think I sent Gabe's like a Rap Soto video at one point, and he might have been in the 70s or something. I can't remember. I'd have to pull the video up, but when he first started with us, his first bullpen, he's topping 78, maybe 77. And now he's 95 plus. I don't know what he's been when he's gone out. When he played, and where did he play last year? Grand Junction. Is that where he was?
Oh man, that sounds about right. It was the Vibes. We got him that contract last year. But yeah, in the Pioneer
Oh, the
League.
Rocky Mountain Vibes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that what it was? Yeah. Anyways, so I don't know where
yeah.
he was in pro ball. I'll probably edit that part out. Don't know where he played. Oh shit. Um, but yeah, with Gabe, I don't know where he's been during the season last year in pro ball, but in facility, he's been 95 plus. I think he's been 96 something in there, where that took years of hard work of him putting in. And, but my whole point, and then with Josh had 2 Tommy Johns back to back. I told Josh, hey, I need to start working with you, man. Like, he's from around my hometown, Josh Mitchell. And I was like, there's no way you should be rehabbing from Tommy John blowout again, have another one. So I started working with him, back here, and he came back, pitched, never really had an arm injury or had an arm issue again. And I know now he's starting to throw recently, I think, and has been throwing well. But obviously he's not going to play anymore. At least I don't think he is. But if he starts throwing 97, maybe he will. But let's not encourage that. Uh, but even there in Texas, you've got Drew Marufo. Dude came to us as a catcher, cut from New Mexico.
Yeah.
And he had this kind of crazy delivery when he first came in. He was, I think, low 80s. He topped 81, 82. And now he's another guy. He's been playing pro ball for 2 or 3 years. He's been up to 95, 96. Same thing. So my whole point of this is when you do train with us, you get that experience. Now, obviously, you get the experience from myself, who played a long time in the big leagues, know what it takes to stay there, the routines you have to have, the discipline you have to have, the programs you have to follow, all of it. But then you also get these guys who are in your shoes. There's a lot of guys, all of our trainers were in that position where they not necessarily had very good stuff, and now they do, or they have had really good stuff, and they got to a higher level than we probably ever thought was really possible, to be honest. Some of these guys, if when Drew stepped in the building, I don't think anybody in there said like, oh, this guy will play pro ball here in a few years. We were probably like, well, let's get him throwing harder and get him a good opportunity in college, get him a good place to play. But because he worked his ass off, he saw himself go from those, mediocre numbers and a mediocre player to like an elite player to do things that not a whole lot of people get the opportunity to do. And
Yeah.
it's a very common thing in our facility, to be honest, in our whole program, not just the facility, but the whole program. I mean, it's become to a point where when somebody goes, "Oh, I want to play like pro ball," I don't even blink an eye anymore. I'm just like, "Oh yeah, we can get you there." We obviously it's going to take a lot of hard work, and that's where I think the ones who don't get there, they forget they're the ones that got to put the work in, but we can give you the tools and the program and everything to get you there. And that I wasn't always like that. As I hate calling myself a coach, but I will be coaching little league this year, so I guess I'm going to have to get used to being called coach. But I I never like when guys would come in and they'd be like, "Oh, I want to play pro ball." I'd just be like, "Yeah, okay, buddy. I don't think you know how hard it is." But now I'm just like, "Yeah, all right, let's do it. Let's figure it out. Let's get you freaking working your ass off. I don't care. You're at a D3, big deal. Get you a pro ball opportunity." Because it happens so much in our
Yep.
program that it's made me more confident to be more confident in them. So not that we got to go on much longer. I think we've been talking for a really long time. I can tell you this episode will probably take like 7 hours to upload on YouTube with my awful internet that I have. But
Yeah.
yeah, anything you want to touch on, before we close it down?
There's always so much at the end of these conversations. I mean, we can dive back into our training process. The things you started opening up with there kind of brought me back to our recruiting conversations, the scouting. There was one point we're here in El Paso, Texas, and this is like 4 or 5 years ago now, and there's a handful of athletes. The reputation here was, "Oh, there's good athletes that they just don't get seen." And there are some fantastic athletes here. That's why we're here in El Paso, is to really help this community by getting them first the best training possible. There's some other facilities that have opened up over the past few years since we started, which when we first came in here, there wasn't anyone that had any Rapsodo, any data, any like consistent training systems. There was some strength programs and pitching and all that, but the group of kids that we had the perception that it's so hard to get out of here. And we took one kid that had D2 experience, one kid that got cut by his JC, one kid that was ineligible at a JC, another that, I mean, was Drew, who hadn't played or pitched at a high level. And he had like a small, I think it was a D2 opportunity after he had caught at New Mexico. And we got all of them pro contracts within the same year. And that was no, I guess, coincidence. A lot of it was they had been working their butts off super
Yeah.
hard, been super consistent and bought in to themselves and the experience that we had to share with them. And I think that changed a lot of the perception for what I'm seeing. A lot of the younger kids here now in El Paso is they believe they can go to a bigger school. They can go to a pro team if they really get better. So I get encouraged to just feeling like we're making an impact here on the community with the amount of athletes that are having that belief that they can play at the next level. And I think that's part of the thorough involvement that we have with our athletes. We know them so well, and you've worked with their programming, and we've seen what works for them and what doesn't. And we understand them at such a core level that it's very easy to connect them with the right coaches or programs or pro organizations that they're going to thrive in. So I don't feel like there's anything that we can't address. It's so many, there's so many avenues we can go down. And I just said 5% battery on my phone. Um, I would encourage anyone that's stuck in their playing career or stuck in their development or just curious on what else is possible without getting caught into the rabbit hole of lessons and showcases and travel ball and high school coaches that maybe are short-sighted with their reach or college programs that aren't really prioritizing personal development and they're really just teaching, bunties and first and thirds and not valuing someone that wants to throw 95. Um, I would encourage them to ask questions, ask the right questions, reach out to us, get a hold of you. You're super available. You reach out to people on social media constantly. We respond to those messages on the website daily. And I would say that's just one of our strengths as a company is we all just care about trying to help the athletes for whatever window we have them for a month, for a week, for a year, for 10 years. And I think that's because we've been down that road ourselves. We've been athletes and put ourselves in those shoes and not trying to take credit for anyone, but just see what kind of impact we can really make. And I just I enjoy this, man. I enjoy helping athletes at this level and whatever level that they're at. Like there's just so much to be developed on if they have the right mentors in their corner. And there's no better place than starting with us at Beimel Elite Athletics. Oh, plug.
No doubt, dude. No doubt. No doubt. Hey, what is that one company called? You see like memes all the time. Where if it's like a janky, like, I don't know, you get like a cell phone, but it's like a Temu. Is there like Temu? Is that a thing?
Timu?
TEMU?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's like the off-brand
Temu. Is that
Amazon.
what it is? Temu?
Timu,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what made me, when you're talking about some of the places that have popped up in El Paso, since we've been there, I consider those the Temu, the Beimel Temus.
Yeah.
Whatever. I'm probably not even saying it right.
Yeah.
Timu. It doesn't sound. It's not like rolling off my tongue right, but yeah, I just couldn't stop thinking about that. It's like, yeah, some of the other places. So we kind of run into that all the time, right? We've outlasted so many different programs because at the end of the day, we have a lot of success and our athletes get better. And it's just some people try to replicate it and they just can't. So, um,
Yeah.
another plug, if you want to get better, you basically you got to come train with us because it's really the only place where from top to bottom, everybody cares about our athletes and we want you to succeed. And we're not going to be uh, douchey about it and take all the credit for your success when you're the one working hard and putting in the work. Like I've said before, and I've said it on a different earlier episode, that's just super tacky to me, where you've got to like feel good about yourself. You need to take credit for your athlete's success. And we, we will never do that because we just enjoy the process. We enjoy helping. We enjoy leading you in the right way. But just as we will not take credit for your success if you are not working hard and you are not doing what you should be, we also will not take credit for your failure. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, it's up to you. If you have goals and you come to me or somebody comes to you and they say, I want to do this. All right. That's awesome. We are going to do every single thing we can to help you get there. But when your actions aren't matching up with your words, and then we kind of go, well, I don't know. It doesn't seem like that's what you want to do, and you're
Yeah.
coming in once or twice a week, or you're not finding time to get in and do things differently than everybody else on your team. That starts to kind of go, well, I will bust my ass. I will do every single thing possible for someone who works hard and wants to do it. But on the other hand, if you're not, we'll give you a kind of pass every once in a while and kind of get on you a little bit and try and hold you accountable. But that wears out every once in a while. And, as it's, you can't save everybody. And the old, the old freaking saying, it's kind of cliche. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And we run into those situations as well. So, but I think we're very good at picking the right athletes that we want to have train with us. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily take a certain skill level. We will take anybody. But at the end of the day, you have to be the one putting in the work. You're the one who has goals. You're the one who is paying money for us to help you get there. And, like I said, we'll hold you accountable, but you got to put the work in. That's the biggest thing.
That's it for sure. Yeah, I think that's the major prerequisite for any program to our level of capacity that we pour into our athletes. The dedication that you have and the ability to just commit to the consistency of the effort level. those are the things that we hope to see. And we've done this long enough now where we've recognized the patterns of athletes that are very, front runner type guys, or they're very fringe, or they're always 1 foot out the door, low level of commitment. Um, it used to actually kill me. Like I used to take it so personally and be very hurt, like upset, like, wait, why is this guy not listening or he's giving up? And that was very challenging to adapt, to realize like you cannot save everyone. They have to be the one intrinsically motivated to be in here, the one that's kind of the driver per se of their story, and we get to help them and we get to navigate that process with them. But I didn't realize how many people, by either negligence, complacency, or just pure laziness, don't realize how long it's going to take to sustain the level of success that they're really interested in, especially when they come in with high goals, like playing professionally or D1 or throwing 90. That's going to take a lot of work over a lot of time. And the secret for the athletes that reach it is they're willing to do it, regardless of the
No
setbacks,
doubt.
the negative attitudes, the people that doubt them. They're just willing to do whatever it takes, whatever road it takes them down. Well, that's what's happening. And that's the end of my story, is I'm going to get to this point no matter what. And it's really fun to see the athletes that do it and they start getting the adversity coming their way. Um, and the roads start kind of changing and pivoting along the way, but we're really good at helping them stay within their guardrails of not like kind of deterring so far away or getting discouraged. And yeah, I can think of about 10 or 15 stories off the top of my head of athletes that we've guided through that process. And yeah, we'll save those for another day for sure.
Yeah, we'll save those for next time. Yeah, I think last thing that I just want to say is I, you're talking about I lose sleep when we do have an athlete who works his ass off and he's not getting to the level that we want him to, like when we feel like,
Yep.
because everybody wants it to happen, everybody wants to happen quick, right? And sometimes that's just not the case. It
Yep.
takes years and years to reach certain thresholds. But there's nothing worse to me. Like I will lose sleep all freaking night if I have to sit there and be like, what do we have to do? We got to figure something out with this guy. Like he's in here every day. He's working hard. He's kind of stalled out, or he's hit kind of like a plateau. And we, like I said, we will do every single thing we can to help those guys, and that's for me where it gets tough. And I'd say the same thing. The guys who just like don't show up and don't do it or don't listen, and you're trying to guide them in the right way, and they just don't really want to hear it, or they think they're working hard, and you're like, dude. And I think the only time I ever yelled at somebody in the facility was somebody who was telling me they were working hard. And I said, it has taken you 4 months to do a 4-week lifting program. Like, what are you talking about? You are never in here. And I
Yeah.
obviously didn't say it that calmly. But with that, with that being said, that used to bother
Yeah.
me. But now I'm just kind of like, well, if you're not working hard, I don't.
Yeah.
It's not going to bother me. I'll
Yeah.
just move
They don't
on
know
to
what they
somebody
don't
who
know.
does. Exactly. And now it's the guys that are busting their ass and they want to see results, and we're just not getting there. And then eventually it happens, we figure it out. But everything's not an exact science. And if it was, everybody would throw 100, everybody would play in the big leagues. You know what I mean? So there's a
Yep.
lot of
Yep.
trial and
For
error
sure.
in everything. But we've been doing it for so long and are so good at it that we can narrow those windows down to where it doesn't take, we're not just throwing shit at a wall and go, hey, hopefully this works. And not to say that we have never done that. We have absolutely done that, where it's like, shit, I don't know what to tell this guy anymore. Let's try this. And then you're like, oh, geez, that freaking worked. It's like, we should have tried that 2 weeks ago. You know what I mean? So yeah, but I think this was a good conversation. Obviously, we got to get rid of these freaking technical difficulties we're having. It seems like every time there's something.
Yeah.
But like I said, Starlink. I think Starlink is the answer to our internet connection woes. Um,
Yeah. Internet first and then figure out our audio. I'm sure mine's not going to come out great since here's my mic and it didn't work. So
I can
we'll
hear you
figure it
good.
out.
Like I
But
said, Riverside. With Riverside, we
yeah.
got magic audio. We'll put that on. I'm sure it'll sound great.
Yeah. Well, Good talking with you, man. We'll keep this conversation going in the next episode, and then yeah, anyone looking for some more information or you have specific questions, message us anytime. BeimelEliteAthletics.com, contact, and we get back to you pretty quickly.
No doubt. All right, dude. Well, I'm sure I'll be talking
See
to you
you.
here soon, but have a good day.
All right, man. All right. See ya.